Mm-hmm.
So the idea that, and I interrupt myself here, the Vanderbilt scale, which is a common one given to children, and the first 18 things are about ADHD, and the next 8 are about oppositional defiant disorder, which to me ought to be part of ADD. I've rarely seen someone diagnosed with just that who doesn't also have ADHD or perhaps on the spectrum. And so it looks a little bit at anxiety, depression, so you can get some clues of what to look at. But the questions on the ADHD are kind of reciting the symptoms from the DSM list. It's not asking, how does this show up? And that's where the asking parents from a different perspective and what parents see. And that's and this brings up one of my pet peeves. Yes, the clinician certainly can use some guidance and articles and presentations at conferences and things, but the time to be able to listen is getting shorter or gone, certainly in primary care medicine. You've got 15 minutes to do this, and here's your diagnosis, bang. Instead of stepping back, and there isn't time to step back when as a pediatrician you're seeing 30 kids a day, or a family physician you're seeing 25. You
right.
have time to, you got high blood pressure, we use this medicine, how's this doing, bing, bing, bing. So the undifferentiated set of symptoms, where one has to step back and look at that, the step back and look at it time isn't there. And the listening for the subtle hints, you have to know a patient, a family, well enough to know, wait a sec, this doesn't fit in. You've got smart kids. How come she's staying up till midnight every night and can't do any other social interactions? Those are more subtle cues, but the time to reflect on it and ask, why is this happening to a parent? There isn't time for the clinician to do that. It's hurry up and get through it, at least in primary care medicine. There's too much emphasis on
I think it's a serious problem we're facing. Because, the many, probably most providers don't have the luxury of time.
Mm-hmm.
And which is a sad reality.
Some of it's because of the reimbursement structure, because primary care isn't reimbursed as well, so the way you have primary care practices keep up, pay overhead, pay staff, pay themselves, is to see more people. Because there aren't procedures. You don't get paid for taking an hour with a family and looking at, a number of these various scales which can give you a cue, they are clue. They aren't diagnostic, but they can give you some ideas where you go next. So that part is a complex deal. So I think when we look at where to put the emphasis, one is on parents and asking parents, either a parent identifies something's not working, or for the clinician to realize we've tried 5 different medicines and this child's still having meltdowns, but they don't have the characteristics of more a bipolar disorder or really anger, mean anger kinds of things. Why is this child reacting this way? And starting with the child, what's the child experience that this is happening?
Right.
And not the surface. recall one boy, I think he was in 3rd grade, and he got very frustrated during some writing thing going on in school. May have been a spelling test, and he so frustrated that he didn't get it that he threw his pencil down, and it bounced on the floor and made a lot of noise. The teacher thought, oh, he's getting violent, and shut down the classroom and evacuated everybody. And this overreaction, the kid was upset at himself. He wasn't angry at anything else, and he was expressing his frustration. But it was read a whole completely different way. And parents, of course, weren't there, so they didn't have a way of understanding what the child was going through. He wasn't able to necessarily say, oh, I was frustrated, that's why I threw my pencil down. He just was reacting the way he felt. So that sorting through the details on that is difficult. And yes, it's difficult for a teacher who has 26, 28 kids. And
it's overwhelming.
26 to 28 kids, there are going to be at least 3 that have ADHD, much less all the other complexity.
Mm-hmm.
So what are we left with? What can parents do, and what can clinicians do, what can teachers do to realize that this is a complex kid with 2 or 3, put it in a box, make a number on it for a diagnosis, but obviously it's all in one kid. How do you identify that it's the complexity is there? It's not just severe anxiety. It's not just ADHD.
Great question. I think there are a few things. The first thing I would say is whenever you've got a kid with any diagnosis, whether it's ADHD, anxiety, autism, one of the first line treatments for that child besides medication is behavior training for the parent. Mm-hmm. And yet only about 30% of parents ever get a referral for behavior training. So the first thing I would say to providers is make a referral to parent training. And I don't mean sign up for a website and take webinars. Parent training is much more interactive than that. Parent training requires that the parent be introduced to shifting expectations, that they get skills, that they get a chance to practice those skills with feedback from a professional, that they get access to a peer community. There are a lot of components that make a behavior training program effective, and what it is, and whether you do that virtually, we do it all virtually, or whether you do that in person, encourage the parent to seek support. Because when a parent seeks support, they're going to see whether their kid is an outlier or whether they're in concert with with their peers. They're going to begin to notice and be able to then come back to the provider and be a better reporter to the provider. If the parent is better educated, they will become a better colleague to the provider in terms of improving nuances in diagnosis.
And that's
the first thing I would say.
One of the things that's been emphasized in literature on ADHD, particularly in kids under 6, is a behavioral training, which isn't teaching the kid how to behave better, but it is.
No, and it's not put the kid in therapy.
Right. and yet the problem is the resources. Now, until there was more online, and maybe this is helpful from COVID, if anything can be, that there's more acceptance of online ways to do clinical diagnosis, work with parents, and do whole group kinds of things. So you and Diane are way in the forefront of doing that.
Yeah, we've been doing it for 11 years.
Yeah, but I
we've always been virtual. Yeah.
The key part you mentioned was support. Now that may start with going to support group, in chat or one of the other things, whether it's virtual or in person, but just the support group, not even the training coaching part.
Well, I'm going to challenge you a little bit, David, because I think that there's a lot of support out there, but the support doesn't move you forward. It doesn't move the needle.
No, I'm saying that can give the parent, number one, okay, I'm not just the only parent dealing with it.
Yeah.
Give them ideas of how is my child so different, and then the clinician needs to, someone of those groups needs to say, parent training really helped me. Here are some resources. And the problem I've had is that resources are few and far between, or, here's the parent training thing, and it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Well, both parents probably aren't going to make that. Oh, it's 7 o'clock at night, so both parents can make it. Okay, you have 3 kids. Who's going to take care of them while the
parents
are going to sit there and the traffic? I'm sure it's other places, but in Seattle, you have to start at 5:30 to get there.
To get there, exactly. Well,
so
and this was my experience. Part of the reason I created Impact, what was then Impact ADHD, now Impact Parents, was because 2 things happened. One, I couldn't make it to the monthly CHAD support group in Marietta when I live in the city.
Mm-hmm.
I just couldn't logistically, feasibly do it. And 2, on the few times that I went, I would look around and I'd go, well, these aren't my people either because my kid is so different.
Mm-hmm.
And there was no indication, like I didn't fit in with the ADD kids, the parents of ADD kids. I didn't fit in with the parents of dyslexic kids. I didn't fit in with any of those groups because my kid was in all of them,
Mm-hmm.
And so the support on the one hand, I guess could have been helpful. I think it would be more now than it was then. But in some ways, it just made me feel worse because, clearly something was really wrong if I didn't fit in there either.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until I started talking in terms of complex kids and realizing how many of these kids have coexisting conditions, and as you said earlier, how few of them only have one condition. Mm-hmm. That gave me sort of freedom to begin to interpret it differently. But it wasn't until I started getting some skills in understanding them. Here's what I think parent training offers. Our job is to understand our kids well enough to learn to manage them and help them manage themselves so
Mm-hmm.
that they can learn to become independent. And that's kind of the progression. So we have to understand them well enough, but then we have to really learn skills for management. We have to shift our expectations to meet them where they are and enroll them in their own process of self-management to get their engagement and their buy-in and their ownership. And that takes some nuance and that takes some skill, and you have to learn those skills.
And meeting them where they are, I think, is one of the absolute keys of that. Not saying, gee, you're being disruptive or you're causing your mom and dad a lot of stress, but look at what's going on for the child. And of course, ask, why did you do that? I don't think the question why should be asked to any child that may have ADHD or anxiety. They don't know why. That's the way their mind works. That's what they do.
Yeah, I'm doing a workshop at the International Conference on ADHD on communication skills, and part of what I'm talking about is language.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my key terms for language is avoid the use of the word why. Because why and how are both trigger words. How are you going to? Well, if they knew how, they would be doing it.
Yes.
They don't know how.
Exactly. Why did?
But we digress.
Those are dead ends. But so this is where I think that the virtual coaching is a way that, sure, both parents may need a babysitter at 7 o'clock at night, but that's easier than both parents having to go somewhere.
Well, or when it's virtual, usually it's recorded. So everything we do is recorded, so one parent can watch it live, another can watch it later, they can take turns, that kind of thing. Like everybody, our program, we have a behavior program called Sanity School, and we always, if they want it, we always give 2 logins. And we encourage them not to do it together because they'll never do it. If they wait to do it together, they'll never get it done. But if they can do it